From praise to scorn, the tide turns on Texas House Speaker Dennis Bonnen as secretly recorded audio is now made public.
I didn't want to be the next victim, and said I needed to have proof of what was said in this kind of a meeting.
We look closer at what led to the recording that's shaking up the state capitol. The crisis in Syria leads to action on Capitol Hill.
I too share the concern that this opens up Syria into more of a Russian expansion, an Iranian expansion.
How a Texas congressman is taking a stand against the president's position. Hello, and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Robert Hadlock. When people complain about why they don't like politics, they point to things like backroom deals, politicians saying one thing in public and another in private, and trading public access for political favors. Now, secretly recorded audio seems to show one of the most powerful people in Texas trying to do all of those things. Here's some background. In June, Speaker of the House Dennis Bonnen and then Chair of the Republican caucus Dustin Burrows met with conservative activist Michael Quinn Sullivan from Empower Texans. Bonnen said he wanted to turn a political rival into an ally. Sullivan secretly recorded the conversation and released the audio. You can hear Bonnen and Burrows offer Sullivan press access in exchange for campaign work against Bonnen's rivals.
I need you firing harder that way than these ways. Does that make sense? So, and let me tell you what I'll do for you. If we can make this work, I'll put your guys on the floor next session.
In the recording, Bonnen says he wanted Sullivan's help targeting 10 moderate Republicans in the primary. The speaker also talked about how proud he was of new laws designed to limit the ability of local governments to collect taxes.
I told them with great clarity, my goal is for this to be the worst session in the history of the legislature for cities and counties.
Bonnen released a statement Wednesday saying this was a political discussion, nothing illegal. But there is an ongoing Texas Rangers investigation into whether Bonnen broke any laws. That recording lasts for more than an hour, and you can hear it for yourself. We posted a link online. You can find it now in the Texas Politics section of your station's website. The recording is embarrassing to many Texas Republicans. So why is it playing out this way? Our Phil Prazen sat down with Michael Quinn Sullivan to get the story behind the secret recording.
For somebody who's just tuned in, how did this whole thing start? What got you in the door to have this meeting?
Yeah, so and I've known Dennis Bonnen for probably 25 years. So we've been acquaintances for a long time. Obviously, when he became Speaker of the House and kind of us doing the thing we do, writing about the session, writing about the outcomes of the session, there were a number of points where I guess Speaker Bonnen didn't necessarily like the perspective we were taking, didn't like the criticisms we were offering. We saw each other a day or two after session ended at the airport of all places. Chatted for a little bit, and he asked if I would be willing to sit down with him in his office and chat more about it. And so, when the Speaker of the Texas House, who you've known for a long time, asked you to do a meeting, you do a meeting.
Why the recording? I mean, did you go in and think that this might be a situation that I don't want to be in and might need this as proof of something later?
Well, as I noted, I've known Dennis Bonnen for 25 years. I know that he's a guy with a little bit of a temper, a guy who can be a little bit reckless. The entire state witnessed earlier in the year where he went out and told people that his family had been threatened by a Second Amendment activist showing up at his door. That was completely untrue. The video evidence from the DPS showed it just didn't happen. It literally was a made-up fairy tale. That Bonnen used, and apparently used without any real consequences. No one really took any time to call him out on it in the middle of the hustle and bustle of a session. And I'd heard rumors of similar instances and decided I didn't want to be the next victim, and said I needed to have proof of what was said in this kind of a meeting.
When did that moment come to you where you thought that something definitely inappropriate but possibly against the law happened?
In some ways in real time, when someone says, when someone with who's a third-ranking constitutional officer in the state says, let me tell you what I can do for you, that was kind of a warning flag for me. So, walk out of the meeting, and the first thing I did was call my lawyer and said, we need to talk, because I was disturbed by what Bonnen said, by what he offered, and in some ways also just kind of disturbed politically by the one day he's telling people, I'm going to go after any incumbent who challenges another incumbent, and yet there he's in the back room saying, hey, go after these incumbents. Set aside policy differences, set aside ideology. All of us as Texans should expect that our elected officials hold to at least some sense of honor, some sense of integrity, that what they say is what they do, and the things they say in public match the things they say in private. So at every level, it was a little disturbing.
Best case scenario, what do you hope that people listen to the recording and what happens down the way?
What I hope happens is, first and foremost, it opens up a great civic dialogue among the citizens, where we have a discussion around what do we as citizens, first and foremost, expect of our elected officials. Are we okay with backroom deal making? Are we okay with a wide delta between what is said in one place and another? Or do we expect something higher? Do we expect something better? First and foremost, let's start with the citizenry. We need to have that discussion. Hopefully that discussion then will permeate into the minds of our elected officials, of our state house members particularly, so as they begin thinking about the kind of person they want as the Speaker of the House in 2021, that they can ask those questions. Do we want someone who's going to be scratching backs and getting his own back scratched? Or do we want someone who's committed to bringing honor and integrity to the legislative process, regardless of ideology?
The recording and the reaction to it could have far-reaching implications in Texas politics. For some insight, we're joined now by Cassandra Pollock, politics reporter from the Texas Tribune. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
We heard that Sullivan say why he made that tape, but it's been around since June. Why release it right now in October?
Yeah, Sullivan has kind of been on a media tour ever since his release of the recording earlier this week, and he's more or less said that the reason for its release this week was ahead of a House GOP caucus retreat, which is happening on Thursday and Friday, and it's, he's kind of cast that as the first opportunity that House Republicans, should they choose to, decide to take action on the recording and the things that are said on it.
You've been covering this from the beginning. What's been the reaction from Republicans and Democrats?
Yeah, I mean, I think the vast majority of both Republicans and Democrats are still trying to process everything and navigate their next steps. There's been some chatter on the Democratic side, hey, do we want to come out as a caucus, 67 members, and demand that the Speaker resigns? No immediate signs that could be happening soon. And then on the Republican side, you've kind of seen a small but growing number of them call for the Speaker's resignation. Members from the 10-member political target list and others too. So it's a fluid situation.
Yeah. Why is Sullivan's group, Empower Texans, so important to Bonin that he would reach out this way?
Empower Texans has a long history of being critical of House leadership, and particularly with a new speaker in town in January. I think everybody was trying to cast it as a new leaf, a new window of opportunity, but the group, which advocates for hardline conservative issues, quickly became critical of the speaker, his leadership style, his politics, and heading into 2020, there was a thought, do Republicans need to be united as we work to fend off Democrats from possibly overtaking the chamber and whatnot. So the speaker has certainly tried to cast the meeting as an attempt to try to repair any sort of relationships heading into, again, a competitive election cycle. And, with more or less the message of, hey, if your group, Empower Texans, could stay out of some contested Republican primaries, we would appreciate it.
Bonin got a lot of praise from Republicans and Democrats for his handling of school finance and property tax reform. Would that be enough for him to keep his job?
Way too soon to say, and I think that seems to be the consensus across the board. There's 18 months out from the next speaker's election, and before that you have a presidential election. So there's a lot that could change makeup-wise of the lower chamber, and then there's also a lot that could happen between now and the next time that the legislature convenes for its next regular session. So a lot of moving parts right now.
Yeah, a lot of time can heal a lot of wounds at the state capitol. It really comes down to his integrity and how he can work with Republicans, right?
Essentially, yes. Republicans and Democrats, what kind of keeps coming up in my conversations with members is, can we ever trust the speaker again? You know, that's coming up from both Democrat and Republican sides. Is the speaker on the last day of session announced that he didn't want any single incumbent campaigning against one of their colleagues, and just weeks later he was caught behind closed doors saying the exact opposite. Is that, you know, again, members are asking, is that who we want in our leader?
We will continue to watch it. Cassandra Pollock with the Texas Tribune, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
People recovering from a deadly mass shooting call on lawmakers to take action.
If we can prevent one more father from not being murdered in front of his children.
How a Senate hearing brought out strong emotions in a city rocked by violence. Texas lawmakers look for answers after the deadly mass shootings in Odessa. Part of the process involved taking a Senate hearing on the road and letting people affected by the shootings tell their stories. Wes Rappaport was at that hearing. He gives us a closer look at what happened.
Hi there. Emotional testimony here at Odessa College as state leaders turn to the community for solutions on mass violence.
Stopped at a red light. He was murdered with an AR-15.
Carla Burns' brother Joe Griffith was killed in the Odessa shooting spree in August.
1 minute this family, this beautiful, innocent family, was enjoying a Saturday afternoon. The next minute, they were living in a virtual war zone. Our whole town became a war zone.
As a Senate panel met to hear from community members about how recent attacks have affected them personally, Byrne told lawmakers she wants tighter background checks during gun sales.
He very cleverly and very easily circumvented the federal law of background checks and purchased a gun from a private seller who is not legally required to put his potential buyers through a background check.
The testimony drawing an emotional response from the committee chair.
So we feel for all of your perspectives, and it's our job. You're right. It is our job, and shame on us if we don't do something.
The panel also heard from Texans who say most of the ideas being explored won't make a difference.
My response to all of these senseless murders is don't take away my right to defend myself.
Byrne encouraged lawmakers to act.
If we can prevent even one more child from being murdered, if we can prevent one more father from not being murdered in front of his children, if we can prevent one more mother and father from burying their child, if we can prevent one more daughter from rolling up to her brother's gravesite to see her mother on her hands and knees digging in the mud so that her dead son might have flowers on his grave. Isn't this worth all of our efforts?
Reporting from Odessa, I'm Wes Rappaport. Back to you.
The Senate committee scheduled 2 more meetings this month, one tomorrow in El Paso, the other on October 30th at the state capitol. A Texas congressman takes a stand on Syria that puts him at odds with President Trump.
But I don't think it was handled very maturely. We're all adults in the room.
We talked to Michael McCall about action on Capitol Hill and a tense meeting at the White House. The crisis in Syria leads to action on Capitol Hill and a tense meeting at the White House. And a Texas congressman is playing a key role in the response. John Dabkovich spoke with Congressman Michael McCall, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, for insight.
Congressman, you have been working on this legislation, a bill that would impose sanctions on Turkey for their attacks into Syria. At this point, though, after all that's gone on, what do you think sanctions would even accomplish?
Well, I think it says to Turkey there are consequences to your actions. Turkey invaded Syria. As you know, I was involved in the resolution on the floor calling into question this policy of withdrawal, and also a resolution to call into question what Turkey was doing, denouncing Turkey's invasion of Syria. I believe it also endangers the ISIS detention camps in terms of our ability to secure those prisons, and also the reconstitution of ISIS in the region. So for those reasons, Chairman Engel and I, in a bipartisan way, and then also in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, both chair and ranking member, we've worked hard on a sanctions bill. And this is all predicated on the ceasefire. We want to give the ceasefire negotiation that's been brokered by the Vice President and Secretary of State an opportunity to work. That's a 5-day ceasefire, after which there will be a permanent ceasefire in the region. If that does not work and it fails, then we're prepared to move forward with our sanctions bill, which would sanction essentially financial institutions associated with the leaders in Turkey and the military movement into Syria.
So the president this week met with members of Congress on this issue, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and that now famous picture of her standing up and pointing at him. You were in that meeting. She said that she basically told him, look, in all of this, all roads point to Putin, essentially questioning his liability. Is that what she said? What was said in that meeting?
Well, I don't want to get into all the details. It was a very intense meeting. Of course, the president's looking across the table at the very person who wants to remove him from office. That adds a lot of tension off the bat, and it went downhill very quickly. She did end with that line. I too share the concern that this opens up Syria into more of a Russian expansion, Iranian expansion, and quite frankly, an ISIS reconstitution. So, I don't know if you saw on the front page of the Austin American Statesman that McCall, calls into question the policy and sort of led this effort with my chairman Engel. But I don't think it was handled very maturely. We're all adults in the room. And I will say after the speaker left that cabinet room, that the other Democrats stayed in the room with us and the president and the Secretary of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we had a very productive discussion about moving forward. My question to the president and the Secretary of Defense and General Milley was, are we going to have a residual force to protect the homeland? We made this mistake under Obama, removing 10,000 troops from Iraq, and we saw ISIS rear its ugly head and create the caliphate. We do not want to see that same situation erupt in Syria. I was given the assurance that we are not removing 100% from Syria, that there will be a residual force both in Syria and Iraq to address any counterterrorism issues and to protect the homeland.
So you were clear that you question this policy, you disagree with this policy of pulling the troops out of this particular part of Syria, but to the point that the speaker made when she accused the president or saying that all those roads go back to Putin, do you question the president's loyalty to the country or to his position in making this move?
Loyalty to whom? I think the president, if I can explain where I think he's coming from, is he doesn't want to start new wars in the Middle East. I think he does sense that the American people are growing weary of these endless wars in the Middle East. I do think we can draw down our troop forces in the Middle East. There's a bit of a mission creep in Syria, as General Milley, who's a Texan who is now the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told me afterwards that there's a mission creep, and we were there for counterterrorism. We had to leave it at that. We're not there to nation build anymore. We can't afford it, and it's a policy that I frankly don't think worked. But we do have to be there to protect the homeland, and that's where I think we had that room to discuss in the cabinet room in the White House. Moving forward, how can we protect the homeland and meet all of our interests that both sides of the aisle have in common? And I will say, again, it was a very productive discussion.
Congressman Michael McCall, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you so much, John.
Questions about how to pay for the fight against cancer.
We want to see better innovation in the state.
Texas voters will decide the fate of billions of dollars for cancer research. We'll look closer at the choice you'll see on the ballot. Starting this week, Texans will get a chance to vote on 10 statewide ballot measures. One of them is Proposition 6, which would increase state funding for cancer research. More than a decade ago, the state issued $3 billion in bonds to create the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, known as CPRIT. Steffi Lee breaks down why health groups hope Texans vote to expand that investment.
Many patients in Texas don't have access to primary prevention and secondary prevention screening for cancers. Breast, cervical, colon, lung, and prostate cancer.
Oncologist Dr. Deborah Patt knows catching cancer early is significant, especially with nearly 5 million Texans lacking health insurance.
A quarter of Texans that don't have insurance as adults don't have any access to that screening. It means that cancer is really deadly for them because they tend to present late stage and die as a result of their disease.
A new American Cancer Society poll shows more than half of Texas voters support renewing the $3 billion in bonds to fund cancer prevention and research for the next decade. In the past, there were efforts to make the agency self-sufficient and not dependent on taxpayers, but lawmakers overwhelmingly supported continuing state support for CPRIT this year.
90% of the money that CPRIT grants out goes toward research. That's research grants, that's recruiting scholars, and then 10% of the money goes directly toward prevention and early detection services.
Latest CPRIT-funded projects include ones that target health effects of vaping.
There are several grants around e-cigarettes and lung cancer that will help us better understand what are the health implications of these e-cigarette use, particularly among youth.
This matters to us. We want to see better innovation in the state.
Steffi Lee for State of Texas.
The CPRIT amendment is one of 10 proposed changes to the Texas Constitution on the November ballot. Some of the measures include whether to establish a fund that pays for flood prevention and disaster relief projects. There's also one to determine how much of the state's sporting goods sales tax should go to Texas parks. Another would allow the state to send more money to public schools. You can read about all the proposals online now. Just look for this story in the Texas Politics section of your station's website. And you won't have to wait long to have your say at the polls. Early voting begins tomorrow statewide and runs through Friday, November 1st. Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Robert Hadlock. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.